Right now, across the Pacific Ocean, something is happening that could change the world's weather.
It isn't just a weather event, it's one of the most powerful climate patterns on Earth. A patch of warm water in the Pacific Ocean can affect India's monsoon, food prices, inflation, farmers, and even the Indian economy itself. This unusual warming of the Central and Eastern Pacific Ocean is what we call El Nino.
In the previous video, we understood what El Nino is and how a patch of unusually warm water in the Pacific Ocean can change weather patterns across the world. But now comes the more important question. Why should India care? After all, El Nino develops thousands of kilometers away from us, roughly 12,000 kilometers. So why is it that every time scientists start talking about El Nino, economists, investors, policymakers, and farmers across India suddenly start paying attention? The answer lies in one word, and that is monsoon, barish. Because for India, the monsoon isn't just a weather event, it's an economic event. Every year, nearly 70% of India's annual rainfall arrives during first 4 months between June and September. That rainfall fills reservoirs, recharges groundwater, supports agriculture, and provides water for hundreds of millions of people. Which means when the monsoon performs well, India usually performs well. But when the monsoon struggles, the effects can ripple across the entire economy. And that's exactly why El Nino matters. Historically, around 60% of El Nino years have been associated with below normal rainfall in India. In other words, if El Nino develops, the probability of a weaker monsoon immediately goes up. Now that doesn't mean every El Nino automatically causes a drought, but it does mean the risks become significantly higher. And once the monsoon weakens, the first impact is usually felt in agriculture. Today, agriculture contributes roughly more than 15% to India's GDP. That might not sound like a lot, but here's a catch. More than 600 million Indians still depend directly or indirectly on agriculture for their livelihood. We are still an agrarian economy. And nearly 45% of India's agricultural land remains dependent on rainfall rather than irrigation. Which means when rainfall goes down, agricultural production often falls with it. Farmers produce less rice, less pulses, less vegetables, less oilseeds, and that creates a simple economic problem. Supply starts shrinking and demand doesn't. People can postpone buying a new phone, they can postpone buying a new car, but they can't postpone buying food. And when demand remains steady while supply falls, prices begin to rise. That's why food inflation is one of the biggest concerns during El Nino years. In fact, historical data shows that food inflation during El Nino years has averaged roughly 1.7 percentage points higher than during normal years. And we have seen this story before. During periods of weather-related disruptions, prices of essential food items such as tomatoes, onions, and pulses have surged dramatically. In some cases, tomato prices have risen more than 30% in a matter of few weeks. Now, at first glance, that might sound like a household problem, but it quickly becomes a national economic problem. Because food inflation doesn't stay inside grocery stores, it spreads throughout the economy. Let me tell you how. When families spend more money on essentials, they have less money left for everything else. Less discretionary spending, less consumption, lower demand across multiple sectors. And that's important because private consumption contributes to nearly 60% of India's GDP. But the story doesn't end there. Because once inflation starts rising, the Reserve Bank of India faces a difficult choice. Its job is to keep inflation under control, and one of the most powerful tools it has is interest rates. If inflation remains elevated, the RBI may have to keep interest rates higher for longer, and higher interest rates affects everyone. Home loans become more expensive, business loans becomes more expensive, companies invest less, consumers spend less, economic growth slows down. Think about that chain for a moment. A climate event begins in the Pacific Ocean, the monsoon weakens, agriculture output falls, food prices rise, inflation increases, interest rates stay high, and economic growth comes under pressure. Thousands of kilometers separate these events, yet they are all connected. But agriculture isn't the only sector affected. El Nino is also associated with hotter temperatures and more frequent heat waves. And hotter temperature creates another challenge, that is electricity demand. As millions of people switch on their air conditioners, coolers and fans, power consumption begins rising rapidly. India recently recorded peak electricity demand of more than 270 gigawatts, the highest ever in the country's history. That puts pressure on power grids, it increases fuel consumption, and it can push energy costs even higher. So now El Nino isn't affecting just agriculture, it's affecting food prices, inflation, energy demand, electricity infrastructure, and economic growth in the end, all at the same time. And that is why, my friends, economists often refer to El Nino as a risk multiplier. Not because it creates every problem, but because it makes existing problems worse. If inflation is already high, El Nino can push it higher. If food supplies are already tight, El Nino can tighten them further. If energy systems are already under pressure, El Nino can add another layer of stress. The good news, however, is that India today is far better prepared than it was a few decades ago. We have larger food reserves, better forecasting systems, improved irrigation infrastructure, crop insurance schemes, and stronger disaster management capabilities. So El Nino is not something that should create panic, but it is something that deserves attention. Because understanding risk is always better than reacting to it after the damage has already been done. And perhaps that's the biggest lesson from this entire series. Most people think economies are shaped by governments, stock markets, and central banks. And while all of them are important, nature still has a vote. Sometimes a change in interest rate affects the economy, and sometimes a patch of warm water in the Pacific Ocean does. And that's why El Nino matters, not just to scientists, not just to farmers, but to every single one of us. Because whether we realize it or not, the weather and the economy are far more connected than they appear. Let me know what your thoughts are about this in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.